On this episode of the Leverage Podcast, Nick talks with good friend Liam Martin. Liam is a well-known tech entrepreneur who has co-founded several companies in the remote working space, including Staff.com, TimeDoctor.com, and most recently, Running Remote, which is the world's largest conference on building and scaling remote teams. Listen in as Nick and Liam dive into the best tools remote teams should be using, like how to efficiently use Slack, how to handle time disputes between clients and contractors, tricks to get your remote team set up, and how to maintain culture, and much more. Welcome back to the Leverage Podcast. Today, I have a very special guest, and I'm really excited for our conversation because I'm interested and passionate about the topic we're going to be discussing, which is all about how to run and scale remote teams. So my guest today is Liam Martin. He is an awesome tech entrepreneur. He is the co-founder of companies like Staff.com, TimeDoctor.com, and also Running Remote.com, which is associated with his conference in Bali upcoming in June, which I most likely will be attending. So anyways, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm excited to chat with you about running remote.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So do you mind just maybe telling us a little bit about what your conference is about and what TimeDoctor and Staff.com is about, and how did you come up with the idea?
Sure. So been running remote for only about a year and a half, but TimeDoctor and Staff.com are approximately 8 to 9 years old. I'd have to double check to know exactly where I'm at. And they were tools to be able to solve a big problem that I had in my previous business, which was an online tutoring company. And I really couldn't figure out exactly how long a tutor worked with a student. So this was creating a big issue for me. I was, in fact, this was 12 years ago, where you were kind of running on Skype and you'd have these guys that would be working with someone in Europe or the United States. And then the student would say, hey, well, you billed me for 10 hours, but I didn't actually consume 10 hours of tutoring time. And then I'd have to go to the tutor and say, hey, did you actually work with Johnny for 10 hours? And they would say, of course. So I'd end up having to refund the student and pay the tutor the full amount. And that was really destroying the business. So then TimeDoctor was a perfect solution to that, and just decided that I needed to get into software. I had a recent exit at that point and realized that this was really what I wanted to get into, which was software. And 9 years later, I'm here. And then by extension, one of the problems that we had is we have about 100 employees in 28 different countries all over the world. And we were having a lot of difficulty finding best practices for how to get to 200 people or 500 people or 1,000 people. There's really no content out there yet because it's so new. So we were continuously trying to find it. We couldn't find it. And then we said, well, let's just build a conference around that idea. And if we lose all of our money and we don't make a profit whatsoever, then at least we are able to improve the overall retention of our own team. Thankfully, that didn't happen. We had a very successful first year, and now we're going back for year 2.
That's awesome. And I can relate on both levels there. One, I've been, at Leverage, we are a outsourcing platform. So I've been in that situation where someone, disputes how long something took, and then no one likes kind of going back and forth. Oh, why did, you said that it took 3 hours, but the client claims that it should have only been an hour, or doesn't understand. And having to refund is really an annoying problem. But then also we grew to 100 people very quickly, fully remote. And it was really learn by doing, because there isn't a manual, so to speak, on how to run a remote team, which is, why my upcoming book Come Up for Air is about that, because I just think that it's really tricky to do, and we need to have more manuals out there on how to effectively run remotely. So what are some of the tricks that or ways that you guys are set up with your company to run remote? How do you actually maintain culture, maintain performance, keep people accountable, keep people aligned on kind of the goals and the vision that you set?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have 17 hours, unfortunately, so I can't give you the real version. You have to go to Running Remote for that. But I mean, just to kind of give you a broad brush, the ability to be able to keep people engaged and focused in the right direction is really kind of what you're talking about. So underneath that, you have culture, you have accountability, you have focusing on your KPIs. All these things kind of focus into, okay, the business succeeding and making money. And we've found, at least in our experience, because our clients are remote teams, that the biggest failure point that we see, which I think we can talk about to a larger degree, is process design, is creating operational documentation, digitizing it, and being able to communicate it easily to everyone inside of the organization. And that's very different from on-premise companies. As remote first businesses, it's a very difficult way to kind of shift your mind from one place to another, because for us, I mean, we've always had this mindset of everything that we do inside the business should be documented and communicated to everyone else inside of the business if they want to have access to it. In our previous call, I had talked about Dimitri, who is the CTO of GitLab, and he has a 3,200 page Git repository on how his 400 remote employees run their business. Absolutely everything that you could possibly think of, it's always committed to that Git. And there are tons of people that have now just forked it all and are using their own versions of their own employee handbook inside of the organization. So that's number one. And then just from a culture.
So with that, anytime they change a policy, they just do a Git commit so you can be notified about any policy change?
Bingo. It's beautiful. It's very, I mean, it's such a beautiful solution to this problem. And I remember when I first saw it, because we had reached out to GitLab last year, who spoke at the conference, and they said, yeah, well, we could really talk about our employee handbook for our remote company. And I kind of remember I got into it after dinner at around 8:30, and I think it was like 3:30 in the morning before I realized that I needed to go to bed. It was just one of those things that, and I'm maybe one of 7 people that probably would be that that nerdy out, like to nerd out on something like that. But it was amazing. They have absolutely everything that you could possibly think of. Like, I just started testing to see what process we have that we thought we had only written, and then tried to put that into their handbook, and it would just pop up. Absolutely everything that they have. Like, how do you sign an email? How do you do a demo? How many shares do you get when you join GitLab? How do you negotiate for a raise? Everything you could possibly think of is in there. And it was just, those guys are really cool, and we wanted to shine a light on them, because a lot of those guys they don't necessarily, I mean, a lot of us as tech entrepreneurs, particularly, we're just nerds. We just kind of tap away on our computers at home, and getting that information out into the broader audience is really the mission statement of the conference.
So for those of you listening that don't know GitLab or GitHub, it's a place where developers store their code, and there's a concept called committing code. And that way you have a history and versioning of everything that's happened. So if you need to, if there's a bug that gets introduced, you can go back in time and see, oh, well, this is what the change was, and you could roll back if you wanted to. And it's a good way to keep, especially teams, on the same page with what's going on with the code base. But are they using it in is it a public repository that they're doing?
100% open source, 100% public. Everyone can see what's happening inside of GitLab.
So what about for non-public type of information? Do they just have a private repository, or they are literally just super open and everything about the company is public? So
from what I understand, everything is open and public. I don't know for sure whether or not they have some sections that are private, but they are definitely inspired by Joel Gascoigne, who is the CEO of Buffer.
Mm-hmm.
And Buffer has a very open policy towards the way that they build their company. So you can see how much money they're making. You can see the salaries of everyone inside of the organization. And he spoke last year on that particular subject, which was quite inspiring. I would say sometimes I disagree with some of his policies, to be honest with you. I think there are some things that you need to keep private, but in terms of company culture, he's got some of the most engaged employees probably on the face of the planet, because he's just a complete open book, and they wanted to implement that same strategy.
Yeah, some of this stuff sounds good in theory, and then when you go to implement it, it can be an absolute disaster, depending on how you implement it.
Yeah, I would say we have an interesting problem right now that we see with a lot of tech startups, which is tech startups are designed to disrupt other industries. So a lot of tech startups just make a ton of money, and they can afford, frankly, to have a completely open company policy, as an example, or be able to see everything inside of the organization. But long term, once the disruptions stop, which is what I think we're starting to see right now, that process slowing down, I think a lot of those businesses will probably not have the same general philosophy that we see right now kind of in Silicon Valley.
Interesting. Yeah, so we have been very, very rigorous about process documentation as well. And I have a little framework that I've made called CPR, which stands for Communicate, Plan, and Resource, because it's something that we kind of noticed we were doing at Leverage, and then when I privately consult with other companies, I kind of noticed the same pattern. And the R for Resource is all about documenting knowledge, both what I would call static knowledge, which would be things that just don't change, like what's the Wi-Fi password of the office if you have an office, or what are the core values. And then there's something called, that I kind of think about as in terms of dynamic knowledge, which are processes like payroll, onboarding, things that you want to generate a checklist and follow a checklist. So I've kind of created this distinguishment inside of my company. And for static knowledge, the biggest issue, and I like the idea of the GitHub repo, I found it difficult to get the team to adopt any wiki, because just human behavior, if it takes more than 30 seconds to look up something, they'll just go and ask someone for the answer.
Yeah.
And it's really tricky to find a wiki that you can organize in a really clean way to make it easy to search. So we've been using a wiki called Ask Spoke, which is a bot that integrates into Slack. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't.
So the beauty of it is you ask a bot, and if it can't find the answer, it creates a support ticket, and then you answer it in a support ticket, add it to the knowledge base, and then it has some type of machine learning and natural language processing, so that over time the bot gets smarter, and you could just start asking the bot. So that was what was interesting. The downside to it, though, is you have to know what to ask. And if you had a repo or some book that people could just look through, they might not know what to ask, but just through reading something, they might find some information that is interesting for them. So you don't get that with this kind of bot. So those are like the pros and cons. Yeah.
We've had one tool, which is we've been testing, and they're coming to Running Remote as well, called Trainual.
Oh yeah. So I'm meeting with the CEO in 2 weeks in Arizona.
Perfect. These guys are killer. And one of the things that we've been testing is gated, basically creating barriers towards completing a task unless you've gone through the checklist. So as an example, we did an Intercom email blast. An Intercom is like an email service providing tool where we hold up all our emails specifically for web apps. And so whenever we go to compose new message and we hit that URL, you can have a Chrome extension that will pop up saying, here is the procedure for sending an email, and have you gone through this checklist? And then if you haven't gone through the checklist and you haven't checked everything off, then that would get reported back. So like that's an example of forcing you to be able to basically go through the process and the proper procedure, which a lot of employees get frustrated over because they think, oh, I've already done this 50 times and this is very easy. And I can tell you an example literally a month ago where we had moved to a new email service provider that did not have the process documentation in place for Intercom. And instead we had it for a different email service provider. We went through the checklist. We kind of went through our own checklist, but we didn't formalize it. And we sent out 500,000 emails without an unsubscribe link at the bottom, which if you guys don't know that process, number one, that's kind of illegal to send one of those.
Now you're flagged as spam for eternity.
You also get 4,000 people telling you to go burn in a fire because you don't have an unsubscribe link. And those are just the types of procedures that you have to have inside of organizations, because if you don't have them, then everything just falls apart. And I see it time and time again. If you do not build strong operational procedures inside of the business, particularly remote ones, they will not succeed. It's the only rule we should really talk about. There's a whole bunch below that, but it's such an important rule that like, if you don't do that, none of the other things that we're going to talk about make any sense because you're still going to fail.
I remember a bit more than a year ago with my ex-business partner, I came across Process Street, and that's what we use now. And if you're listening, I think we have a deal with them. Like, I think if you try the coupon code Leverage, you get some discount. But I remember looking at this and having this conversation where I said, look, I think that in order for us to scale remotely, we really need to document all of our core processes to make sure that things are consistent, and then remove any risk that if someone leaves, they leave with this knowledge. And I remember it was a conversation, we didn't see eye to eye on this, and eventually I kind of like won the argument, and it's become one of the core tools that we use now at Leverage. Mm-hmm. And we even take it a step further, and we force rotations in the company where different people are forced to do different people's processes so that you're always getting fresh eyes looking at a process. Another big benefit of using a tool like Process Street, and I don't know if I haven't looked too deep into Trainual. It's on my next up list, but it integrates with tools like Zapier, which is an automation tool. So not only are you just making sure that things are consistent and reducing errors, but you also can save time by automating various steps in these processes that you're doing constantly.
Yes, I think that it's so important to not only document it, but just confirm that it's done. And that's probably the second part that a lot of people miss is like today. I don't even like going through checklists. No one likes that, right? It slows you down fundamentally. But from an organizational level, it actually speeds you up. Everyone gets fearful of bureaucracy, but efficient bureaucracy is actually what speeds up an organization, not what kind of. You have a team of 3 people, everyone can figure out what to do. When you have a team of 300 people, that organization in its 3-seat kind of mindset will completely fall apart. And you need to be able to document at 3 seats so that when you're at 300 seats, the organization is running and you can get to 600 and 1,000 and 10,000.
It's like building a foundation. And one of the big mistakes I made was we scaled too quickly and cut corners. And just like you have technical debt, which means basically you don't build your code base in an abstract enough way so that it's scalable. If you want to tweak something, it's easy. A lot of times with companies, including mine, you cut corners and you build something very specific to what your need is at that moment without building enough of a foundation. So when you outgrow it, you're kind of back to square one and you have to rebuild. And we've had to face that, and it's so important. Luckily, we realized it kind of after year 1, and like wait until 10 years. What do you use? And this is an issue that we currently face right now. So I'm curious to know how you handle this. So we document knowledge in Ask Spoke or Process Street, depending on if it's kind of static or dynamic. What do you use for agendas? Is there a specific tool that you use for agendas, or are you just using Google Docs and using kind of like a team drive? And then the follow-up question is, when there's a decision made in a meeting or anywhere, where do you document decisions that are made? Is there a separate place for that?
So we had been using Google Docs up until approximately 6 months ago. And they're still great. And I think for people that are already using Google Apps, it's a fantastic spot to remain. But literally what we were doing is we would have meeting agenda document for each department. And then everyone would kind of put in the points that they want to discuss inside of that meeting. So it was very difficult for us to be able to, number one, there was no longitudinal components to the data. They were just static snapshots in time. And it was very difficult to be able to look at what was done previously, which was a major problem. Then the second thing that we did, after that, basically, we found this tool, and it's by a friend of mine, but he was very much studying us before he implemented it, which is called Fellow. And you can go to fellow.co to be able to check it out. And in essence, what it does is it sucks in all of my meetings and all of the people that collaborate on those meetings. And it also sucks in, if you have any type of HRIS software, like HR accounting software or whatever it might be, it pulls in the entire organizational structure. So it knows who are my direct reports. And then it can create one-on-ones or meetings, and they can be weekly meetings as an example. So I'm looking at it right now, and I know all of the things that everyone wants to discuss on Monday when I have all of my weekly meetings, which is today. And then I can see what happened last week. And I can also create action items, which just happen to be able to push into Time Doctor, which is really handy, so that I can measure, okay, I'm looking at an action point right now as an example, which is, let's see here, launch wireframe of new website. And that is assigned to Igor, who is on the content team. So then this week, I can see that he spent 7 hours and 22 minutes and 13 seconds on that particular task. And if I click on it, I can get all the detail of that particular task through Time Doctor. But then I'm also going to be able to get a report today to see, we're going to go through all those action items and say, did you get it done? Did you not get it done? What was the blocker? All that type of information. So incredibly useful for us, definitely a tool that we're moving forward with. And it's also been great just getting generalized feedback, because you can also say something like, hey, how HR can come in at any point and say, how do you like working with Liam on the marketing team? Do you think that he's a piece of shit, or do you think that he's doing a great job? And what are things that he could do to improve? And you can anonymize it, or you can not anonymize it. It's just a really interesting, fully featured tool. And I think that they're going to do huge things in the future.
All right, I have so many questions because this solves a big problem. We've been using Cisco Spark Notes for agendas, which
that sucks.
Yeah, and they're decommissioning it anyways. But it was better than nothing because it integrated with your calendar and you could add agendas on top of it. So is this kind of like a better version of that?
Yeah, right now I'm looking at all of my action items as an example, and so I have my top one, my most important one was get a list of people who wanted to unsubscribe from the email, i.e. FU spammer email replies. Mm-hmm. And that's an example of something that it's one of the top things that I need to get accomplished, and it came out of those meetings. So the other thing I like the most about Fellow is you can go through all these discussions. And for me, I sit on 6 departmental meetings on Monday. Yep. So that's Monday's like my stand up where I'm like, okay, what are the KPIs? Did we hit them? Did we not hit them? What are we going to do next week? So you have all these meetings and you're delegating the vast majority of it. But unfortunately, there are always some things that I need to personally do. And then I can immediately create that as an action item, and it pushes into any other app that I'm currently using. And into Fellow.
So do you still use a separate project management software like an Asana, for instance, alongside with this?
So you can. I use Time Doctor because I'm pushing that task directly into my desktop task folder, which is, I'm just going to say, yeah, okay, that's the top priorities. And I have a Fellow folder that's automatically created inside of Time Doctor. But you can do the same thing inside of Asana or Trello or whatever you want. But ironically, what's ended up happening is when I'm logging into Fellow, I'll see those action items on my side panel as a recurring kind of reminder to say, that's the most important priority of the week. forget about answering emails, forget about doing podcasts with really interesting people. You need to get these email, these unsubscribe requests out, because if we send out another blast and those guys get emailed again, they're going to get really angry.
Okay, I'm gonna check this out because that's a big pain point. What about for decisions made? Like let's say you have a meeting on a Monday, and it's kind of funny, but I do the same thing with my schedule, and Mondays are my department weekly meetings.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much nicer to just pack it all in on one day too, and then just know that if you don't even work the rest of the week, at least you kind of unstuck everyone else.
Yep.
So let's say you're on a call and you make a decision, and the decision is, company policy update. You're not going to work on Fridays anymore. So where would you document that decision that was made on that meeting?
So we'd probably actually send out a memo to everybody on Basecamp about that. We still use Basecamp for kind of like long form communication, and then people can respond. And there's very good documentation in Basecamp in comparison to something like Slack, where it'll just get forgotten out of the other 10,000 messages that were sent that day. So we create that as a memo. And then more importantly, we would probably also assign that as an action item for the director of HR inside of Fellow. And then the director of HR would know, okay, there are these changes that need to be made to that particular procedure to be able to have it move forward. And then they would change the documentation if it needed changing, as an example.
Yeah, no, it is easy for things to get lost in Slack, which I guess, we've tried hacking it in many ways. We created an announcements channel where we'll just post decisions. We've tried that. That doesn't really
find
work.
Those still it's just not nothing beats email. I open up my email every week, and at least every week, probably every day. And I sit down and I say, okay, this is what's going to happen. Like, these are the things that I really need to pay attention to. And it's still the application that I spend the most time on every single day, which kind of, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but it's just the truth. And having that Basecamp thread right inside of my email, it gets paid attention to a lot more often than a Slack message. Because right now, I'm looking at 109 new Slack messages that a lot of them are not directly connected to me, but they're in there, and everything gets lost in that in that message kind of cloud.
Yeah, no, I hear you. One of the things that I've spent a lot of time with is how do you configure Slack? Whereas Slack, if you don't know what Slack is, it's a communication tool for internal communication. You can organize conversations by channels, and they have third-party integrations. So I think one thing that I've done is I've gotten really, really smart about naming conventions of channels. And if you start finding yourself talking about a particular topic, we immediately create a channel with a proper naming convention. We pretty much make all channels private so that you don't have people joining that don't need to join. And then we're also really good about third-party integration. So one that I'm testing right now, which I'll get back to you about, is must read, where you can control who's read a Slack message that's important. But the main motivation of Trainual, which is why I'm meeting with them, is to use it for onboarding, but also ongoing education. So if there is a company policy change, keeping track of making sure people have acknowledged it by looking at a tool like Trainual, which is a learning management software.
Yes, I think that it's we even spot check test our people on a regular basis. So we have I was looking yesterday at our SEO onboarding document. So the first document, the core document that any search engine optimization rep, which are basically people that get backlinks on the internet, that they read when they first join the company. And we have them continuously go back to that document quite a bit. And we'll also spot check test them on that document, which I think has been a company that I learned a lot from on that subject is Prialto, who is their virtual assistants for executives. And they have very clear operational procedures in place, but they also connect it to testing, so that everyone knows, yeah, okay, I could be tested. A company called Prialto.com, and they're kind of like virtual assistants for Fortune 500 CEOs. And good company, has been in business for many, many years. And they're just really good at understanding their processes and procedures, which is why they've been in business for many, many years in comparison to other businesses that we've seen that have kind of popped up and then disappeared.
So really quick, because we're running out of time, but I could talk to you literally for hours. And I'm doing a workshop. I know that you're doing your conference, which I would love for you to share a bit more with our listeners about in June. I'm doing a workshop on execution and running remote teams in Utah end of May. So I'll give you, it's May 20th through 22nd in Park City. So would love for you to come and be a guest there.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably going to be pretty busy because I think I will just about be leaving for Bali.
No,
so for us, it's been a really important commitment to kind of just say like, man, I'm probably a little too freaked out over this. Probably like, your first child or something like that. But I'm spending way too much time on this conference than I should be on the regular business. But it's just because I've been so focused on making sure that everyone has a great experience. So I'm going there like a month and a half early.
Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, there's worse places in the world to go to than Bali.
That's the other advantage. Yeah.
Could we just do a rapid fire geek out really quick on the tools that you guys use? So
Let's go.
this fellow.co, that's one. What are some other ones that you guys are using as core tools?
So we use, we're now using Trainual. We're actually experimenting with that quite a bit. In comparison, we did have GitLab, but it was not necessarily the same type of solution as Trainual. For a lot of our dashboards, we use ChartMogul, which kind of looks at all of our core data, which a lot of our employees have access to, which just shows us basically how much money we're making and how that business is doing.
We use that one too. It's a good
tool. We use Klipfolio as well as a major, like everyone has access to that inside of the organization. And that is just a way to conglomerate all of our different KPIs. And then everyone in the company has access to everything inside of that Klipfolio dashboard. So they know, as an example, what the NPS score for employers and employees are by country. And then you can conglomerate that into, you can slice and dice that data however you want. So if you want to geek out on that, you totally can. Departmental KPIs, all that kind of stuff. We use Gmail. We use Google Apps for Gmail, which is probably I think it would probably be the core tool that we use. Like if I had to reduce us down to a singular tool to be able to operate the business off of, I think we could probably run everything just off of Google Apps for Business.
I just last week upgraded the Google Apps for Business account to not the basic, but the business version. So you have Team Drive. Do you guys use that one?
I don't know if we do. I don't know what Team Drive would necessarily be. How is it different?
So instead of people within their own Google Drive, like creating docs and then it lives in their drive and then they have to share it with individuals and then it can get messy, right? Have you ever experienced that where it's like, well, who owns that Google Doc or what folder is that Google Doc in? Is it on yours or a colleague's? Mm-hmm. You create a team drive for all the different departments or projects. And then the team drive owns the file rather than the individual. So anyone can create a file and put it into a team drive and then it automatically shares it, or anyone that's added to that team drive has access to it.
Got it.
It's really cool. I've only been playing with it for a few days, but I like it a lot.
Yeah, I don't know if I know we do have we did do all of our process documentation inside of our company Google kind of cloud repository, but I don't know whether or not we went that far. I'd have to check that out.
Gotcha. Okay.
Cool.
What else is in the core?
I mean, Skype and Slack. Skype is still currently the best tool to be able to do video calls and audio calls on the fly, and then some chat connected to it. And then just Slack is the best tool to be able to do really interesting and intense instant messaging conversations, but their video product doesn't really work super well. Zoom is a really good paid version of that. You know, if you want to go for a super high quality paid version of that tool, I would go for that. We also use Trello just for general small projects. We use Stormboard for a lot of whiteboard collaboration, Basecamp. One that I always use that no one really uses anymore, because I know there's a whole bunch of other tools, but I'm kind of stuck in my ways, is Jing, which is a product that's probably like 15 years old. And all it does is it sits up in the top right-hand corner of my screen. And at any point, I can do a 5-minute screen share and turn that into a shortened link, and then give it to somebody. So I can just say like, hey, this is what's wrong with the website. There's this button here that needs to be moved here. It needs to be turned from orange to green. And then I click process, it turns it into a little link, and then I can just send it to anybody in an email or a Slack message.
Yeah, I use Cloud App for that.
Yeah, I mean, any of these, I'm really kind of tool agnostic. You need to have something that can, as an example, create a video that you can talk about, and you need to be able to quickly communicate that to other people. That's just so much more effective than sending 40 images or doing an actual phone call. It's sometimes a lot more effective to just actually like create the video, and then they can watch it whenever they need to.
Well, also along with process documentation, you know, for me, a process is well documented. If you could just hand it over to someone, they can execute it without any of your help. And in order to really be able to do that, you need to have annotated screenshots and video showing various steps of a process. So it's really useful when you're getting into the documentation stuff that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, we always have videos associated with everything, because I don't know about you, but I mean, whenever we try to solve problems, I was trying to solve a problem yesterday, and we went through a whole bunch of text tutorials, and then we still couldn't figure it out. And then we just typed that question into YouTube, and we found a 4-minute video tutorial, and we got it. And that's the differentiator. And I'm sure for people that are listening right now, they've gone through that same process. Don't be stingy. Spend the extra 5 minutes to just go through that process on video, throw it up as a short link, and boom, you've got that process is so much clearer now than it was 10 minutes ago.
Totally. And why use Trello and Basecamp, or same type of thing, Skype and Zoom? Why not one or the other?
So with Skype, it's an interesting interdepartmental issue. So developers hate Skype for some reason, at least in our company. They do not enjoy it that much.
Well, they hate anything. I think developers in general hate any like application that you have to install.
Yeah. So in comparison, salespeople, no one says like, hey, I'm going to Slack you. They say, let's do a Skype call, or they do a Zoom call. But we're still seeing probably 60, 70% of the communication that's happening on the sales team side and the customer success side happening through Skype. And they have a massive install base, so that's not going to change. So we're agnostic with the process, but then, you know, on the other hand, you can't get 50 people or 100 people onto a Skype call. It doesn't work. But we do AMAs every month. So me and Rob, my co-founder, we do an Ask Me Anything, and anyone can show up and jump on that call. Well, you can't really do it on Skype, but you can do it on Zoom. So there's no kind of like, unfortunately, there's no perfect tool for everybody. And we just try to adapt as much as possible. But one thing that's very important is make sure that if you're going to add a new tool to your kind of technology stack, you think about it very deeply. We're always very slow to add tools.
Well, same with me. The cost of switching a tool is so high. For me, it has to have good customer support and an API and Zapier integration to even really be considered.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's kind of just like the initial pass. But
yeah, we've had a lot of, like, Slack is a perfect example. I think we're definitely paying 5 figures a year for Slack. It's very expensive. And
we're in the 5 figures as well.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that initially I was quite apprehensive about making that jump, and we've made the jump now, but now we've committed to something that's going to cost us $20,000-$30,000 a year as a tool. That's a big commitment, right? Like that's a lot of money, and you need to be careful because these tools can really inch up. And I'm saying this as someone who literally runs one of those tools, but they can work into your organization where it's like, man, I'm spending $20,000 a year and I didn't even realize it. So they have a very sneaky way of working their way into your organization.
Well, there is a tool called Siftery, which can analyze all of your software costs, and you can see month over month how much you spend in aggregate on all your.
I would be scared of that. Mm-hmm. That would just depress me.
Yeah, mine's probably lower than yours, but it's still around $10,000 a month in software costs for all the different tools that we use.
That's expensive.
Yeah, it's super. I mean, at the same time, we didn't have to raise millions of dollars and rebuild everything. Like I'm a big believer in not reinventing the wheel. So I could use software like yours and not have to rebuild it, because to rebuild Time Doctor, what would that cost someone? Millions and millions of dollars and a ton of time. So, it makes sense to pay for software, but it can get out of hand quickly. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, this has been great. Where can people find out more about you and the conference and everything else you're up to?
So if you want a free trial of Time Doctor, go to timedoctor.com. It's pretty self-explanatory. If you want to go to the conference, and it's for people that want to build remote teams. So if that's you, we'd love to see you. It's in Bali, and just go to runningremote.com. We'll probably have a link in the show notes for that. And then if you want to get in touch with me personally, one of the things that I've been experimenting on is YouTube. And you can go to youtube.com/runningremote, and you can ask me questions there, and I will respond within 12 hours. We also have all of our previous talks that are on there. So if you want a taste of what the conference is like, you can check it out there.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining today. I would love to have you back. And I feel like we could just geek out on this for hours and hours, but
I think we could do it in Bali. That's the best place to do it.
We will do it in Bali. Well, thanks again for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Leverage Podcast. And for anyone running a remote team, join leaders from Help Scout, Evernote, AngelList, and many more at the world's largest remote work conference Liam's hosting in Bali, June 29th through 30th. Head to runningremote.com to learn more and use our special promo code GETLEVERAGE for 20% off your ticket.